That's what I'm saying. That's what yeah, exactly. That sounds like, alright, so let's put that.
So it's really a resolution point.
You should be okay here. Okay, we okay with that? All right, fiscal policy. Here we go. And I had mentioned before, when it comes to fiscal policy, there are two players in the game. And I'm going to talk about the kinds of policies that are put into place with fiscal policy. So this is chapter 13. Yeah.
22, when you said, I'm sorry, you said the interest rates, right, was shifted to the right, and what else?
Shifted to the left. Interest rates rise, right?
Yeah.
And we also said number 2 was B and C, correct? Government raises corporate profit taxes. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So when you think of fiscal policy, we're looking at macro, we're looking at big government, so the big G. So we have the president and Congress. All right? Those are the players that are involved in what we're going to be looking at, these two types of policies. The tools that they have, which we talked about before, is government spending. How much money is the government spending? And taxation. Those are the two tools for fiscal policy. That's it. All right, so any political personality in regards to their platform, it's going to come down to whether or not they're increasing or decreasing taxes, or whether or not they're increasing or decreasing government spending. Now, I need you to go into your textbook, just as I talked about that warp drive. Same thing is what is depicted here with two different types of policies in fiscal policy, with fiscal policy. So turn in the beginning of your chapter on page 289. All right. Fiscal policy is either going to be to speed up the economy or slow it down. And on page 289, the first type of fiscal policy we're looking at is expansionary policy. So expansionary fiscal policy is policy that we're going to use during recession, when productivity is slowed down and we need to get it going again. You guys remember business cycle, the width, right? That's our trend line. And so if we're down here, so this is recession, this is recession. Remember, this is a trough. You guys remember this? And then this is expansion. And then this is the peak. Guys, remember those 4 parts? Right? And if we're here at a recession, what the government is going to do is they're going to come in and put policies into place to get us around that corner so that we can experience growth, so that we can expand our economy. Whatever they need to do to make things work in turn. So that's what we use in expansionary policy. So with expansionary policy, as I said, we're looking at times of recession. And so as a result, we need to get money and moving in the economy. We're going to do one of two things. We're going to increase government spending, decrease taxes, or do some kind of combination of both. And we can, during this time, how many have ever heard the term deficit spending? What does that mean? Go ahead, Dylan. What's deficit spending?
I know it's pretty much just spending just to give people jobs, get people motivated, get people working.
Okay.
I know I remember one of my history teachers talking about it when we were going with FDR during the big New Deal and everything like that.
So well, let's talk about a deficit. Is the deficit good or bad?
Bad.
Bad. What does it mean to be in the deficit? You're in debt and you spent more than you made, right? You've spent more than you made. So you're in a deficit, and what do you do but spend more money when you're in a deficit? Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense initially. But remember we did the example between government spending and taxation if they're both at $20 billion? With that multiplier effect, that's what you look at is even if I'm in a deficit and I do a little bit of spending, it's rippled. And so if it's rippled, my outcome, not necessarily all the time guaranteed, but my outcome can be positive for the economy because I've rippled. Just as you said, Dylan, I'm creating jobs, I'm doing something, I gotta get things moving. I gotta get us around the corner. Make sense? So expansionary fiscal policy is during times of recession. What type of unemployment do we have during times of recession? Remember the types of unemployment. What type? Cyclical unemployment. Bad type of unemployment. Not that any type is good, but cyclical is really bad. So this is what will happen during expansionary. Now, in your textbook, what they have here is that whole warp drive thing. So let's just take a look at it and you can figure this out. So I'm at, this actually should be AD1 and this should be AD2 because you're moving to the left. So I do an increase in spending, in government spending, by $5 billion. It results in a $20 billion increase in aggregate demand. What's my multiplier? 4. Got it? $5 billion seed multiplied by 4 produces a $20 billion increase in aggregate demand. All right? So that's why we do deficit spending. So if you ever hear it, now you know what we mean. You're in a bad way, but we're going to do some spending to make some things happen. The opposite of expansionary. Are we okay? Or do we got to run out? Who was that?
That was the same lady.
Oh, okay, Karen, so she opened
Just
her.
unlock it.
Okay, so
Everything is
you can leave. We can leave. Okay, thank you. All right. Contractionary fiscal policy. This is the opposite. Now remember I told you we only have 2 tools, government spending and taxation. It only involves the president and Congress. All right? Now during contractionary fiscal policy, things are moving too fast. Basically, we're experiencing high inflation rates. We've got to slow this puppy down. So literally what we do in contractionary fiscal policy is we literally siphon out some of the air of the tires of our economy, all right? So what are we going to do? We have inflation. Prices are increasing too much fast. Remember I told you demand pool inflation is when there's too much money chasing the same goods and services. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take some of the air, I'm going to get some of the money out of this economy. So I'm going to decrease government spending, but I'm going to get into your pocket and I'm going to increase taxes. So remember when we did the taxation and government spending, Remember, I told you taxation affects our ability to spend immediately, and then it's multiplied. So when we looked at the $20 billion increase in taxes, that affected, that was then multiplied by our propensity to consume and then multiplied. So I'm going to decrease government spending, I'm going to increase taxes, do some combination of both. But my hopes is that I'm going to create a surplus. What is the opposite of a deficit? A surplus, where I have extra. Again, but I'm siphoning the air out of the economy tires.
Could you say that one more time? Just the way that you
Which with the surplus?
Yeah. No, I know I get the surplus, but just the way they did it to get this surplus.
They basically they don't do government spending. They increase taxes. So they're taking money out of the economy to slow it down because inflation is too high. All right? Yes?
Well, that's like, I guess it's to avoid things like wheeling wheelbarrows of money just for loaf of bread, things like that, right?
Yeah. You got to get it because got too much money in the system chasing the same goods and services. That's what demand pull inflation is. All right? So turn in your book to page 291, and we have a nice little picture of this in regards to contractionary fiscal policy. So what's happening, basically I'm starting here, which this should be AD 3, 4, and then 5. I decrease spending by $3 billion. That's going to take me down to that dotted line, all right? But then the overall effect, I really don't even need the third line, is a full $12 billion decrease in aggregate demand. What's my multiplier? 4. $3 billion seed results in a $12 billion result. Okay? So again, that warp drive, like, vroom. All right? Here's the problem with fiscal policy versus monetary policy, which we'll get to later on, is it takes a lot for it to really take effect. Sometimes a little bit too long, and people get impatient. All right?
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
So you see how you have like expansionary fiscal policy basically equals to recession. Contractionary, is that equal to like surplus or what is
No, well, it should create a surplus, but we use it during times of inflation.
Okay.
All right, so when we're in a recession, I erased my business cycle. When we're in a recession, we're going to do expansionary.
Okay.
Hopefully and we're going to do some deficit spending. But when we need to siphon out, contract, is during times of inflation. And we need to hopefully get some money out of the system and create a surplus. Now, here's where, again, this is the big government. This is the big G. Taxes and government spending. Depending upon what our output is, if we have, how does the government make money? Taxes. So that's what the T is. And then they also spend money. So if they collect more tax revenue than they've spent, we operate at a surplus. If they spent more money than we actually collected in taxes, we operate in a deficit. I have students ask me all the time, oh, the government, are we going to fold? Are we going to, crash and burn kind of thing? As long as there are people working, that means people are paying what? Taxes. And if they're paying taxes, the government is getting something. Okay? So that's what we got to kind of look at it. But with the government, just like getting us around the corner, their responsibility is to keep us stable. So, there are times in our history where we've operated at a deficit, we've operated in surplus. I know during Bill Clinton's administration, we actually operated in a surplus, which we hadn't operated in a surplus since 1966. Okay, so I don't think many of us were a glimmer. All right, so again, it's balancing the economy. Yes.
All right, so I get it, right, with the taxes and the surplus, and the less they spend, I guess, is the cause of the. When you say spend, like spend on what? Like, what do you mean, like
government spending? We'll talk about that. Big piece of is the military, education. Big chunks of our economy.
Into the country.
Well, just spending overall. For the federal government, it's big chunks, and I'll show you that. Actually, it's in your book too.
Okay.
Yes, Dylan.
For the national debt, isn't it an issue that for how we're paying it off?
And see something. This is and you bring up a good question, Dylan, because some of the national debt is we're never going to get it. We're never going to get that money back, and it has a historical foundation because a lot of a big chunk of our national debt started after Reconstruction, after World War II, where the IMF and the World Bank were created then. And we've made a lot of loans to a lot of countries that they defaulted. We'll never get that back. But that's a part of our debt, though. And then, how many of you have had a credit card and you only pay the interest part? That means you're not touching the principal. So what's happening? You never get, what is it? That if you have $10,000 worth of credit card debt and you only pay the minimal, it'll take you, 25 years or something to pay it off? Something crazy, right? Is that right?
Something.
Yeah, something like really crazy, really crazy. All right. Problems with, like I said, the players are president and Congress. If they don't get along, we have this, right? In regards to policies and movement. So, and that's what we're experiencing. Problems with fiscal policy deals with timing. It's something we call a recognition lag. Like, when do we actually publicly announce that we're in a recession? So, it's already occurred, but now we're just acknowledging it. Administrative lag. This is a lot of the bureaucracy in fiscal policy because individuals that are in elected public offices, almost half of their time is spent on their re-election campaign. So as soon as they get in there, they try to do things. They got to see, what the administration before them did. And then when they get in there, they can do a couple of things, but then they got to kind of focus their energy on being reelected because that is a part of our process. And then operational lag. A lot of times with fiscal policy, someone will put an act into play, but they might not see the manifestation of their effort because they might not have gotten reelected, like they're long gone. The whole political business cycle, policies, reversals, crowding out effect. This one I want you to take a look at in your textbook, crowding out effect. So, in your textbook, we do have a model that goes with this. And then I'm going to get back to, go to page 305, and then I'll go back to the public debt thing. All right, page 305. What is the crowding out effect? Looking at investment. Remember we talked about investment. Can I move from this page? We okay? Yeah? All right. Remember when we talked about investment in regards to real interest rates and how much your ROI is? Well, what's happening in the crowding out effect is we can literally move, have some temporary moves in regards to interest rates. So the higher the interest rate, the less I'm going to invest, right? So, but if I have an increase in investment demand, it might be at some higher interest rates. I can literally consider crowding out some incentives to invest. And that's what we mean by the crowding out effect. Not so much that you have to move lines in this model. I'm not expecting you to understand moving models. But basically, by when we have a large public debt and we have so much in regards to financing, it literally crowds out private investment where companies don't want to invest because it's too much of a risk. Okay? Too much of a risk. So we crowd out potential investment. And so that's what that model is speaking to. All right? Now, lastly, I talked about our debt. So let's kind of look at the big pie. On page 302. Page 302. Page 302. When we take a look at how much we owe, overall, it's in the trillions. What is it about? Almost, 15 trillion?
It's even more than that.
Even more than that? Okay. So we have a big public debt in the United States. Now, please note that our public debt is accumulative. So think of it from 1776 Alexander Hamilton, who was the vice president, floated the first governmental bond that paid off debts from, I think it was the American Indian War, one of the major wars in the past. But he was the first one to actually finance war. But since that time, because we were in a deficit, actually got us into a surplus. Think of public debt as something that doesn't go away, but it accumulates. Different than surplus and deficit. Surplus and deficit is in a fiscal period, like 12 months. But debt is just accumulative, all right? So we divide our pie into two places. That's held outside the U.S. and it's held by the U.S. government. All right, Federal Reserve, and this is a little data, I think this is 2013. So federal government or Federal Reserve, which we'll talk about, in the U.S. government agencies, all right? That's held by the federal government, about 40%. 60% is held outside the federal government. So this is state and local, about 11%, U.S. banks and financial institutions. Here's the problem. Remember I told you about like the World Bank, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund? There's a lot of foreign ownership outside our federal government that, you know, is a part of our debt, which a big portion of that we will never see again. But we just kind of add on and on and on. And so when you think about public debt, yes, it's big. Is it growing? Yes. But, you know, some of it can never really be completely rid of. Yes.
Is there a point where, like, we'll cap off on debt? Like, I know Congress sets an artificial cap, but is there an economical cap where, like, we can't borrow anymore?
We can. You know, I mean, we've had like governmental shutdowns and things of that sort where you know, this is it. We're not doing anymore. It can, but a lot of times those are temporarily. Again, as long as people are working, the government has some type of income. All right, may not tax that big purple 33% slice of the pie, but it'll definitely take care of the 40%. Okay. All right, and don't forget, I need a couple of lines on Monday about your topic.
When it says U.S. individuals, is that like us, like our debt?
Yeah. Right, and that's not much at all. 6% compared to like 33% outside. Hey.
Hey, kind of asking for mercy.